My name is Edith, 33 years old, and I never imagined my father's funeral would become the setting for the most humiliating and shocking moment of my life. After 12 years of marriage to my father, my stepmother, Victoria, chose that sacred moment to announce to everyone that I was not my father's biological daughter. The smug look on her face as she dropped this bomb is forever burned into my memory. But what happened next when our family lawyer cleared his throat changed everything. If you are watching this video, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button and stay tuned for how a single envelope turned my nightmare into Victoria's worst day ever. To understand how everything unraveled at the funeral, I need to take you back to the beginning. My childhood was mostly beautiful despite losing my mother to breast cancer when I was just 10 years old. My father, Thomas Sullivan, was my rock through that devastating time. He was an architectural engineer who somehow managed to balance his demanding career with being the most attentive single parent a child could ask for. Dad rearranged his entire work schedule to be there for me. He would drop me off at school every morning and either pick me up himself or arrange for my Aunt Martha, his sister, to watch me until he could leave work. He never missed a parent, teacher, conference, dance, recital, or science fair. Those first years without Mom were hard, but Dad made sure I always felt loved and secure. Eddie, he would say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use, "You have your mother's eyes and her spirit. She would be so proud of the young lady you are becoming." Those words were like a warm blanket on cold nights when I missed Mom the most. As I moved through my teen years, our bond only strengthened. Dad took me on weekend trips to national parks where I discovered my passion for wildlife photography. He bought me my first real camera for my 16th birthday, a Canon that I treasured for years. Those trips together, hiking through forests and mountains, gave me a love for nature that eventually became my career. I went to college just 3 hours away from home so I could visit regularly. Every other weekend, I would drive home and Dad would have my favorite meal ready. We would sit at the kitchen table catching up on everything from my classes to his latest building project. He came to all my photography exhibitions at school, standing proudly beside me as I explained my work to visitors. After graduating with a degree in photography and environmental studies, I began building my career as a wildlife photographer. Dad supported me through the early uncertain years, both emotionally and sometimes financially, when I needed it. He believed in my talent before anyone else did. Then when I was 21 and Dad was 48, Victoria entered our lives. She was a real estate agent who helped Dad find a new office space for his expanding engineering firm. She was 41 at the time, blonde, polished, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who was used to getting what she wanted. I remember the first time Dad introduced us. It was at a casual dinner at our favorite local restaurant. Victoria was all smiles and warmth, asking thoughtful questions about my photography and seeming genuinely interested in getting to know me. "Your father talks about you all the time," she said, touching my hand across the table. "I feel like I already know you, Edith. Those wildlife photos in his office are breathtaking." Dad was beaming at us getting along, and I was happy to see him looking so alive. It had been just the two of us for so long, and he deserved companionship. Victoria seemed perfect on paper. She was successful in her own right, shared Dad's love for architecture, and most importantly, she made him laugh in a way I hadn't heard since before Mom died. What started as business meetings quickly turned into dates, and within months, Victoria was a regular presence in our home. She brought along her 15-year-old son, Jake, from a previous marriage. Jake was quiet and somewhat standoffish, but I attributed that to teenage awkwardness and the natural adjustment to new family dynamics. Victoria and Dad had a whirlwind romance. Within 8 months of meeting, they were married in a lavish ceremony that Victoria largely planned. It was far more extravagant than anything Dad would have chosen for himself, but he went along with it, clearly beside with his new bride. "Your father deserves the best," Victoria told me when I questioned the expensive venue. "He worked so hard, let me spoil him a little." It was hard to argue with that sentiment, even if something about the rapid pace of their relationship left me uneasy. After the wedding, subtle changes began to appear in our family dynamic. Dad, who had always called me at least twice a week, became less reliable with our phone dates. When I would ask about it, he would apologize profusely, explaining that Victoria had planned a dinner with her friends or that they were looking at investment properties together. The family home where I grew up began to transform. Victoria redecorated room by room, replacing the comfortable, slightly outdated furniture with modern, sleek pieces that looked beautiful but somehow lacked the warmth of before. Most painful was when I came home one weekend to find that my mother's reading nook, a small corner of the living room with her favorite armchair and bookshelf, had been completely removed and replaced with an elaborate bar cabinet. When I expressed my hurt to Dad, his eyes reflected pain, but he quickly covered it. Victoria thought it was time to update the space, he explained gently. I saved all of your mother's books in boxes in the attic. We can go through them together sometime. That sometime never seemed to come, as Victoria always had other plans when I visited. I started to notice Dad becoming increasingly isolated from his old friends too. The poker nights that had been a monthly tradition for years quietly disappeared from his schedule. His college roommate, who always came for the Super Bowl, was told that Victoria had planned a couple's trip that weekend instead. Victoria's spending habits were another red flag. Dad had always been comfortably well off but conservative with money. Victoria, however, drove a new luxury car, every year spent thousands renovating rooms that had just been updated, and took frequent shopping trips to New York and Los Angeles. Your father wants me to enjoy life, she would say when I once commented on a particularly extravagant purchase. He works hard so we can have nice things. The we never seemed to include me, though. The gifts Dad gave me for birthdays and Christmas once, so thoughtful and personal, became generic gift cards with Victoria's handwriting on the card. When I would thank him, he would look momentarily confused, then quickly smile and say, "I knew you would like it." Perhaps most concerning were Victoria's subtle but persistent efforts to create distance between Dad and me. She would schedule couples massages during times I had planned to visit. She would forget to tell Dad about my calls until days later. She would make comments about how busy I must be with my career, suggesting it might be better if I did not visit so often since I clearly had so much going on. By the 3rd year of their marriage, I felt like a guest in the home where I had grown up, and increasingly it seemed like an unwelcome one. As my career took off, I moved to a city about an hour away from my childhood home. The distance made it easier for Victoria to control when and how often I saw my father. I tried to maintain our close relationship, scheduling regular visits and calls, but increasingly found myself facing a wall of excuses and scheduling conflicts. "Your father is just exhausted from work this weekend," Victoria would say when I called to confirm a visit. "Why not try again next month when things slow down?" After these cancelled plans, Dad would always call me apologetic and promising to make it up to me soon. His voice carried a resignation that worried me, but whenever I tried to dig deeper, he would change the subject to my work or some news story he had read. On the rare occasions, when I did make it to family gatherings, Victoria's coldness toward me was becoming less and less disguised. She would greet me with an air kiss that never made contact and immediately pull Dad away to deal with some invented household emergency or to speak with other guests. Jake, now in his 20s, had absorbed his mother's attitude toward me. He would make snide comments about my career, asking if I still took pictures of squirrels for a living, and suggesting that Dad had wasted money on my education. 3 years ago, Dad was diagnosed with heart disease. Victoria immediately positioned herself as the gatekeeper of all information regarding his health. She attended every doctor's appointment and controlled his medication schedule. When I asked for details about his treatment plan or prognosis, I was given vague reassurances. "The doctors say he is doing fine with the medication," she would tell me. "No need for you to worry your pretty head about the details." I tried to speak with Dad directly about his health, but he seemed uncomfortable discussing it with me, often glancing at Victoria as if seeking permission to share information. It was a shocking reversal of our once open and honest relationship. The last time I saw my father alive was 1 month before his death. I had forced my way past Victoria's excuses by simply showing up unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. Dad was visibly delighted to see me, though he looked paler and thinner than I had expected. We sat in the garden, Dad's favourite place, while Victoria hovered nearby, pretending to prune roses, but clearly eavesdropping on our conversation. Dad kept looking at me with an intensity that suggested he wanted to say something important. But whenever he would start to speak about anything serious, Victoria would interrupt with offers of drinks or comments about the weather. At one point, Dad reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly. "Eddie," he said quietly, using my childhood nickname. "There are things I need to tell you about." Before he could finish, Victoria was there, announcing that it was time for Dad's medication and that he needed to rest. She practically shooed me out of the house, assuring me that she would have Dad call me later that week. That call never came. Instead, 3 weeks later I received a call from Victoria informing me that my father had suffered a massive heart attack and passed away in his sleep. Her voice was flat, almost businesslike, as she relayed the news that shattered my world. "I have already made the funeral arrangements," she added before I could even process what she was saying. "The service will be this Saturday at Evergreen Funeral Home. I will text you the details. I was stunned by both the news and her coldness. When I asked why I hadn't been consulted about the arrangements for my own father's funeral, Victoria sighed as if I was being difficult. Edith, I was his wife. These decisions fall to me now. I know what Thomas would have wanted. The funeral Victoria arranged was lavish and impersonal, nothing like what my father would have chosen for himself. The casket was the most expensive option, the floral arrangements extravagant, and the service scheduled at the most prestigious funeral home in the area rather than the small chapel where we had held my mother's intimate service years before. When I arrived at the funeral home, I felt like a stranger at my own father's funeral. Victoria and Jake stood at the entrance, accepting condolences from guests. Victoria wore a designer black dress that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral complete with diamond earrings I had never seen before. Her greeting to me was cold. "Edith, good of you to come," she said, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than the daughter of the man we were burying. Jake simply nodded in my direction, not bothering to mask his disinterest in my presence. Thankfully, my best friend Sophia had come with me for moral support. She squeezed my hand as we moved past Victoria into the main hall. "That woman should get an Oscar for worst stepmother in a leading role," Sophia whispered, trying to lighten my mood. The funeral home was filled with people, but I recognized few of them. Many appeared to be Victoria's friends and business associates, people who had barely known my father. They clustered in groups, speaking in hushed tones that sometimes rose enough for me to catch mentions of the estate and property values. I found a seat in the second row, noting with a stab of pain that Victoria had arranged the seating, so that only she, Jake, and a few of her close friends were in the front row, designated for immediate family. Just before the service began, Aunt Martha found me. She was Dad's only sibling and had always been warm and supportive to me after Mom died. She looked as out of place as I felt her simple black dress, a stark contrast to Victoria's showy attire. "Edith, honey," she whispered, hugging me tightly, "something does not feel right about all this. Victoria has been acting strange even for her, and I tried to talk to her about some of Thomas's personal items I thought you might want, but she shut me down completely." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I know, it feels like she is erasing me from Dad's life, even in death." Aunt Martha squeezed my hand. "Your father loved you more than anything in this world, never doubt that." As we spoke, I noticed a man in his 60s with silver hair and a serious expression watching us from across the room. He wore an impeccable dark suit and carried a leather portfolio under his arm. "Who is that?" I asked Aunt Martha. "That is James Harrison, your father's lawyer for the past 20 years, she replied. "He looks concerned, does not he?" Before I could respond, the funeral director announced that the service was about to begin, and Mr. Harrison took a seat near the back of the room. The funeral service began with soft classical music. The Dad would have appreciated one of the few touches that felt genuine. The funeral director, a solemn man in his 50s, welcomed everyone and expressed condolences to the family, his eyes moving from Victoria to me and back again. Victoria sat rigid in the front row, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her performance of grief was theatrical, complete with small sobs at precisely timed intervals. Jake sat beside her, looking bored and checking his phone when he thought no one was watching. From my second row seat, I could see several of Victoria's friends turning to look at me with barely concealed curiosity. One woman leaned toward another and whispered something that made them both glance back at me with pitying expressions. The funeral director invited Victoria to speak first. She approached the podium in what could only be described as a catwalk stride, adjusting the microphone with manicured fingers adorned with new rings I had never seen before. "Thomas was the love of my life," she began, her voice wavering with practiced emotion. "Our 12 years together were the happiest of my life." She continued with stories about their life together, many of which sounded embellished or completely fabricated to my ears. She described vacations they had never taken, and shared inside jokes that seemed out of character for my father. Most painfully, she positioned herself as his caretaker and closest confidant during his illness, while painting me as a distant daughter, too busy with my career to visit. Despite his disappointments, she said, looking directly at me, Thomas always tried to see the best in people. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he offered a brief formal statement about how Thomas had welcomed him into the family and been generous with his time and resources. There was no warmth, no genuine grief in his words, only a perfunctory acknowledgement of a man who had spent 12 years trying to be a stepfather to him. When the funeral director called my name, my legs felt weak as I made my way to the podium. Looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar but many unknown to me, I took a deep breath and spoke from my heart. "My father was an extraordinary man." I began, my voice shaking slightly. After my mother died, he became both parents to me, never once making me feel like I was a burden or that our family was incomplete. He taught me about resilience, integrity, and unconditional love. I shared stories of our hiking trips, his unwavering support of my photography, and the quiet ways he had always shown his love. As I spoke, I noticed several of his old colleagues and friends nodding and smiling through tears, while Victoria sat stone-faced, her fingers drumming impatiently on her purse. My father's legacy lives on, not just in the buildings he designed, but in the values he instilled in me and everyone who knew him well. I concluded, my voice breaking. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life. As I returned to my seat, Victoria's glare followed me, her displeasure at my heartfelt tribute unmistakable. Several of Dad's colleagues spoke next, sharing stories about his professional brilliance and personal kindness. Each authentic memory seemed to irritate Victoria more, as if these genuine reflections were undermining her narrative. After the last scheduled speaker, Mr. Harrison, the lawyer approached the funeral director and had a brief whispered conversation. The director nodded, and Mr. Harrison seemed about to address the gathering when Victoria suddenly stood up. Before we conclude, she announced loudly, moving quickly to the podium before anyone could stop her. There is something that needs to be said. The funeral director looked surprised but stepped aside as Victoria took control of the microphone again. This is very difficult, she began, her voice trembling with what I would soon realize was not emotion, but anticipation. But in times of loss, the truth becomes more important than ever. She paused dramatically, scanning the room to ensure all eyes were on her. Thomas made a discovery in the final months of his life, she continued. A discovery that caused him great pain, but one that he came to terms with before his passing. My stomach nodded as she turned to look directly at me, a small cruel smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Edith, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room, is not Thomas's biological daughter. A collective gasp rippled through the funeral home. I felt as if I had been struck physically, the air leaving my lungs in a painful rush. Thomas discovered this fact recently. Victoria continued, seeming to gain energy from the shocked expressions around her. DNA does not lie. Edith's mother had an affair and Thomas was not her biological father. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper, waving it like a flag. I have the DNA test results right here. Thomas was devastated but wanted the truth to be known, especially as it pertains to his estate and final wishes. She looked around the room with an expression of full sympathy. Thomas changed his will just before his death once he learned the truth. As his legal wife, I am now the primary beneficiary of his estate, along with my son Jake, whom Thomas loved as his own. She returned her gaze to me, the pretense of sympathy falling away. I am sorry, Edith, but you have no legal claim to Thomas's assets or property. I thought it best everyone understand this now to avoid any awkward legal situations later. The room erupted in whispers. I sat frozen in my seat, tears streaming down my face, my mind unable to process the humiliation and shock of Victoria's announcement. This could not be true. My father would never have kept something like this from me, would never have rejected me based on biology, even if it were true. But Victoria stood at the podium, a triumphant gleam in her eye as she watched my world collapse in front of a room full of witnesses. The funeral home had fallen into stunned silence following Victoria's announcement. My ears were ringing, and I felt physically ill, gripping the edge of my seat to steady myself. Around me, people were whispering and staring. Some looked at me with pity, others with morbid curiosity. Victoria's friends were nodding as if they had suspected this all along, while Jake wore a triumphant smirk that made my blood boil despite my shock. "This is outrageous," Aunt Martha suddenly declared, standing up from her seat. "My brother would never have kept such a thing secret, and he certainly would not have announced it at his own funeral. Victoria, you should be ashamed." Victoria merely smiled coldly. "Martha, I understand this is difficult to accept, but the science is clear. Thomas confided in me as his wife. He simply did not know how to tell everyone, especially Edith." I sat there, my mind racing through a lifetime of memories with my father. His proud smile at my graduation. The way he always said I had my mother's eyes but his stubborn chin. The thousands of moments where his love for me had been unquestionable. None of it made sense with what Victoria was claiming. Just as the whispers were growing louder, Mr. Harrison, the silver-haired lawyer, calmly walked to the front of the room. His face was composed but determined as he approached the podium. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said formally to Victoria, "I need to address the gathering now. Please step aside." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "We are in the middle of a funeral. James, whatever legal matters you need to discuss can wait until tomorrow at your office." Mr. Harrison did not budge. "I'm afraid this cannot wait, and it directly pertains to what you have just shared." As Thomas Sullivan's legal representative for over 20 years, I have a professional obligation to proceed. Victoria's confidence wavered visibly. The will has been settled. There is nothing to discuss. The funeral director, sensing the tension, stepped forward. Perhaps we should allow Mr. Harrison to speak, as he was Mr. Sullivan's legal counsel. Victoria hesitated, then stepped aside with obvious reluctance, her eyes never leaving the leather portfolio Mr. Harrison carried. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," said, adjusting his glasses as he took her place at the podium. "I apologize for this unusual circumstance, but Thomas Sullivan anticipated this very situation and left explicit instructions with me to be carried out in exactly this event." The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. I found myself holding my breath as Mr. Harrison opened his portfolio and removed a sealed manila envelope. 3 months ago, he continued, Thomas came to my office highly distressed. He shared concerns about certain actions and plans being made without his knowledge. He asked me to prepare several documents and hold them until either he requested them or until his death, with specific instructions for their use. Victoria's face had begun to lose its confident expression, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. Thomas suspected that false claims might be made regarding his daughter Edith's paternity. Mr. Harrison said clearly. He therefore took proactive steps to protect her and to ensure his true wishes would be known and legally enforced. He held up the envelope. "This contains medical records, certified DNA test results, and a recorded statement from Thomas himself made under legally witnessed conditions in my office." Victoria stepped forward, her voice sharp. "This is highly inappropriate. My husband was not thinking clearly in his final months due to his medication. Whatever he told you was influenced by his declining health." "Actually," Mr. Harrison replied calmly. "Thomas was examined by an independent physician immediately before making this recording specifically to document his mental competence. That certification is also included in this envelope." Victoria's face had gone from confident to concerned. She turned to address the room. "This is a private family matter that should not be aired publicly. I must insist we conclude the service now." "I believe everyone here wants to know Thomas's true wishes," Aunt Martha called out. "Let Mr. Harrison continue." Several of Dad's longtime friends murmured their agreement. Mr. Harrison nodded respectfully to Victoria. "Mrs. Sullivan, Thomas specifically requested that if paternity claims were raised at his funeral or immediately after this recording should be played for everyone present. Would you like to withdraw your previous statement, or shall I proceed as Thomas instructed?" Victoria glanced around the room, seemingly calculating her options. The whispers had stopped and all eyes were on her. Even Jake was looking at his mother with growing confusion. "Play it," someone called from the back of the room. Others joined in their voices, growing more insistent. Victoria attempted to move toward the exit, but several people shifted in their seats, effectively blocking her path. Her face had begun to take on a panicked expression I had never seen before. "Very well," Mr. Harrison said, reaching into his portfolio again and removing a small digital recorder. "In accordance with Thomas Sullivan's explicit instructions, I will now play his recorded statement." He placed the recorder on the podium and pressed play. The room collectively held its breath as my father's voice, strong and clear, filled the space. My father's voice emerged from the small speaker, instantly filling the funeral home with his presence one final time. "My name is Thomas Sullivan, and I am recording this statement on April 10th in the presence of my attorney James Harrison and a notary public. I am of sound mind and body, though recent medical tests confirm that my heart condition has worsened." Hearing Dad's voice made my tears flow freely again. He sounded tired, but resolute, his familiar tone, bringing both comfort and renewed grief. "If this recording is being played," he continued, "it means I have passed away, and exactly what I feared might happen has occurred. To my daughter Edith, I am deeply sorry for the pain this situation must be causing you. Please know that nothing could ever change my love for you, or the fact that you are without any doubt my biological daughter." My heart leapt at these words, and I looked up through my tears to see Victoria's face beginning to drain of colour. "Approximately 5 years ago," Dad's voice continued, "I discovered that my wife Victoria was having an affair. Rather than confronting her immediately, I chose to observe and gather information, as certain financial irregularities had also come to my attention. What I discovered was deeply troubling. The room was absolutely silent now, everyone leaning forward to catch every word. Victoria had been systematically isolating me from my family, particularly my daughter Edith, while diverting substantial assets into accounts under her sole control. More disturbing, I uncovered a plan she had been developing with her son Jake to contest my will after my death by claiming Edith was not my biological child. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathering. I stared at Victoria, whose composure was rapidly crumbling. To protect Edith and ensure the truth would be known, I secretly obtained DNA samples from both Edith and Jake and had comprehensive testing done through 2 separate reputable laboratories. The results, which are included with this recording, conclusively confirm that Edith is indeed my biological daughter with a paternity probability of 99.99%. My hands were shaking as I processed what I was hearing. Dad had known. He had protected me even while keeping this painful knowledge to himself. The DNA testing revealed something else, something I did not expect. Dad's voice continued, a note of sadness entering his tone. The tests confirmed that Jake is not my biological son, despite Victoria's claims throughout our marriage that he and I had developed a special father-son bond. Jake jumped to his feet. "What? That is a lie," he shouted, turning to his mother with confusion and anger blazing in his eyes. Victoria tried to grab his arm, but he shook her off violently. Dad's voice continued steadily. "I have documented evidence of Victoria's multiple affairs throughout our marriage, as well as her systematic financial exploitation. Bank records show she has diverted over $2 million from my accounts to offshore holdings under her name over the past 7 years. Victoria was now trying desperately to leave, pushing past people toward the exit, but 2 of Dad's business partners had moved to block the door. Despite all this, Dad said, his voice softening, "I did not immediately divorce Victoria. My health was declining, and I worried about what desperate actions she might take if confronted directly. Instead, I worked with my lawyer to protect my assets and revise my will to ensure Edith would be properly provided for." There was a pause, and when Dad spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Edith, my beloved daughter, I am so sorry I did not tell you what was happening. I wanted to protect you from this ugliness, and perhaps I was a coward, unwilling to face the conflict that would come from exposing Victoria. I hope someday you can forgive me for not being stronger, for not removing this toxic presence from our lives sooner." Tears streamed down my face as I listened to my father's final confession and apology. Across the room, Victoria had given up trying to leave and stood with her back against the wall, her face a mask of fury and fear. As for Victoria, Dad's voice hardened. "I have left provisions in my will that reflect the truth of our relationship. While I have set aside a small amount for Jake, who is an adult now and was manipulated by his mother throughout his life, Victoria herself has been explicitly excluded from my estate due to documented fraud and misconduct." The recording continued with more specific details about financial accounts, property ownership, and legal provisions Dad had made with Mr. Harrison's help. Victoria looked like she might faint, while Jake had moved as far away from his mother as possible, staring at her with growing horror. "The full documentation supporting everything I have stated is in Mr. Harrison's possession," Dad concluded. "Edith, I love you more than words can express. I am so proud of the woman you have become, and I am sorry I will not be there to see where your talent and kind heart take you in life. You are my greatest joy and legacy." The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence hanging over the funeral home. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "I have here the certified DNA test results and the updated will Mr. Sullivan referenced properly signed and witnessed 2 months ago." All eyes turned to Victoria, who had gone from pale to flushed with anger. She lunged forward, suddenly pointing a shaking finger at me. "He was confused," she shouted. "This is all a setup. Edith manipulated him when he was sick." Mr. Harrison shook his head. "Mrs. Sullivan, as the recording stated, Mr. Sullivan was examined by an independent physician immediately before making these statements. I also have records of the private investigator he hired, with photographs documenting your activities over the past 3 years." Victoria's carefully constructed facade completely crumbled. Her face contorted with rage as she realized her plans had not only failed, but had been exposed to everyone present. Mr. Harrison calmly opened the sealed letter and began to read the formal provisions of my father's will. His steady voice cut through the tension in the room as he outlined how the estate would be distributed. The family home and 70% of Thomas Sullivan's financial assets are bequeathed to his daughter Edith Sullivan. He read his architectural firm is to be placed in a trust, managed by his longtime business partner Robert Chen, with profits divided between the firm's employees, and a scholarship fund for aspiring engineers. Victoria made a choking sound from where she stood against the wall, her perfectly made-up face now streaked with actual tears of rage. "A sum of $100,000 is allocated to Jacob Werner." Mr. Harrison continued with the stipulation that these funds be used exclusively for education or career development purposes. Jake looked up in surprise, clearly not expecting to be included in the will at all after the revelation about his paternity. As for Victoria Sullivan, Mr. Harrison's voice took on an even more formal tone. She is explicitly excluded from inheriting any portion of the estate due to documented financial misconduct. Furthermore, she is required to return all assets transferred to her from Thomas Sullivan's accounts over the past 5 years, amounting to approximately $2.3 million. He looked up from the document. Mr. Sullivan also filed a detailed report with the District Attorney's Office regarding the financial fraud with instructions that it be submitted formally upon his death. The implications of this statement hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her legal troubles were just beginning and everyone in the room knew it. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered, trying to regain her composure. "I will contest this. Thomas was not in his right mind." As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Harrison replied calmly. Mr. Sullivan anticipated this response and took extraordinary measures to document his mental competence. 3 separate physicians certified his cognitive clarity. The will is ironclad, Mrs. Sullivan. As the reality of her situation became clear, Victoria's demeanor changed from defensive to desperate. She turned to Jake, reaching for his arm. "Jake, tell them how Thomas loved you as a son. Tell them how close you were." Jake jerked away from her touch. "Close? You always made me go to those boring fishing trips and baseball games with him while you were off shopping with your friends. And now I find out he was not even my father. Who is my real father, Mom?" All eyes in the room turned to Victoria, whose face flushed deep red. "This is not the time or place," she hissed. "Actually, Jake raised his voice since you decided a funeral was the right place to try to disinherit Edith with lies. I think it is exactly the right time. Who is my father? Was it one of your real estate clients, your personal trainer, that guy Craig you were always texting?" Victoria's eyes darted around the room, seeking escape or sympathy and finding neither. "You ruined everything," she said through clenched teeth. "I ruined everything." Jake's voice cracked with emotion. "You lied to me my entire life. You used me in your schemes with Thomas. Did you even love him at all, or was it always about his money?" Victoria's silence was answer enough. "I think Aunt Martha said, standing up, that we should return to the purpose of today's gathering, honoring Thomas." "Victoria, I believe it would be best if you left now." Several people murmured in agreement. The funeral director, who had been watching the scene unfold with professional restraint, stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, perhaps it would be appropriate to step outside for a moment." Victoria looked around the room, seeming to realize that every person present had now seen through her facade. Her carefully constructed image had shattered beyond repair. In that moment, something in me shifted. The shock and hurt were still there, but a new strength rose up, fueled by the knowledge that my father had loved me enough to protect me even from beyond the grave. I stood up, my voice steadier than I expected. "Victoria, for 12 years I watched you manipulate my father and try to push me out of his life. You took advantage of his kind heart and generous nature. And even in death you tried to take away my place as his daughter." She turned to me, her eyes cold, despite her disheveled appearance. "You always were a problem, Edith, always in the way of what I deserved." "What you deserved," I repeated incredulously. "You had a good man who welcomed your son into his home, who provided a beautiful life for you, and it still was not enough. You had to steal from him and lie to him." Victoria lunged toward me suddenly, trying to snatch the envelope from Mr. Harrison's hands, but several people moved quickly to restrain her. "Let go of me," she shrieked, struggling against their grip. "This is all lies. I was a perfect wife to Thomas. He needed me. Call security." The funeral director instructed one of his staff quietly. As Victoria continued her tirade, Jake stood apart, looking lost and shell-shocked. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He too had been Victoria's victim in many ways, raised to be part of her schemes. "Jake," I said, approaching him cautiously, "I am sorry you had to find out like this." He shook his head, unable to meet my eyes. "I did not know about the paternity scheme, not until recently. She told me it was just to ensure we were taken care of, that Thomas would have wanted it that way." "Did you believe that?" I asked quietly. He finally looked up, his eyes troubled. "I wanted to. It is easier than admitting your mother is." He did not finish the sentence. The funeral home security arrived, followed shortly by actual police officers someone had called. As Victoria was escorted out, still protesting her innocence and threatening lawsuits, she turned back one last time. "You will regret this, all of you. I gave Thomas the best years of my life. I deserve everything he had." Her final words hung in the air, perhaps the most honest thing she had said all day, revealing the true nature of her feelings for my father. As the doors closed behind her, the funeral home fell into an uncomfortable silence. Mr. Harrison approached me, handing me the envelope with all the documentation. Your father wanted you to have this, Edith. He also left a private letter for you that I was instructed to give you after the service. I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Thank you for doing this, for following his wishes. Your father was a good man, he replied simply. One of the best clients and friends I ever had. The funeral director stepped forward gently, suggesting we take a brief recess before continuing with the memorial. People slowly filtered out to the lobby, many stopping to offer me words of support or share brief memories of Dad. For the first time since receiving news of his death, I felt a tiny spark of comfort. My father had known the truth. He had not been fooled in the end. And most importantly, he had loved me enough to ensure that Victoria's final act of cruelty would not succeed. In the days following the funeral, Mr. Harrison guided me through the legal process of securing the estate. He explained that Dad had been meticulous in his planning, leaving no loophole Victoria could exploit. The family home was legally transferred to my name, and the financial accounts were secured before Victoria could attempt to access them. Your father was thorough, Mr. Harrison told me as we sat in his office reviewing documents. He even filed restraining orders to be activated upon his death legally, barring Victoria from entering the family home or contacting you directly. Those first weeks were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and grief. Victoria made several attempts to challenge the will, but was quickly shut down by the courts, especially once the evidence of financial fraud came to light. The district attorney opened a formal investigation into her activities, freezing her personal accounts and placing a lien on her luxury condo. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake in my childhood bedroom now, back in the family home, replaying Dad's recorded words and wrestling with complex emotions. Why hadn't he told me what was happening? Could I have helped him somehow? The questions circled endlessly, keeping sleep at bay. Aunt Martha became my rock during this time. She stayed with me for the first month, cooking meals I barely ate and sitting with me through evenings of tears and painful memories. Your father thought he was protecting you, she told me one night as we sat in the garden he had loved. Thomas always shouldered burdens alone ever since you were little. It was his way of showing love. With her encouragement, I started seeing a therapist who specialized in grief and family betrayal. Dr. Lewis helped me work through the anger, not just at Victoria, but also at Dad for keeping so much from me. Forgiveness is not about excusing what happened, she explained in one session. It is about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of that anger forever. Your father made choices that he thought were right at the time. Even if we can see now that sharing the truth might have been better. Slowly, I began sorting through Dad's belongings. In his home office, hidden in a false bottom drawer I had never known existed, I found a journal he had kept during the last 3 years of his marriage. Reading it was painful, but illuminating, documenting his gradual discovery of Victoria's true nature and his struggle to decide what to do. Told Eddie I was too tired for our weekly call today. One entry read, "The truth is Victoria deliberately scheduled a dinner with her friends at the same time, and I did not have the energy for the fight that would come from changing plans. I miss our talks. I need to find a way to reconnect with my daughter without triggering Victoria's jealousy." Other entries detailed his growing suspicions about financial irregularities, his discovery of Victoria's affairs, and eventually the devastating realization of her plan to challenge Edith's paternity after his death. Consulted with James today about protecting Eddie's inheritance. He wrote about 6 months before his death. The private investigator's report confirms my worst fears about Victoria's intentions. I feel like such a fool for not seeing her true nature years ago. How do I protect my daughter now without creating a war that will make her final memories of me all about this ugliness? Finding these writings helped me understand Dad's silence in his final years. He had been caught in an impossible situation. His declining health making him vulnerable to Victoria's manipulations while he tried to shield me from the painful truth. As weeks turned into months, I also had to deal with Jake. Despite everything, Dad had made provisions for him, recognizing that he too had been manipulated by Victoria. At first, Jake avoided me too, ashamed to face me after his role in Victoria's schemes, but eventually he reached out through Mr. Harrison. We met at a neutral coffee shop, both of us awkward and uncertain. Jake looked different somehow, the cockiness gone from his posture, his expression more open than I had ever seen it. "I did not know about most of it," he said after we had settled with our drinks. "The paternity fraud, the stealing. I knew she was pushing for more control over Thomas's assets, but she always framed it as protecting our future." "When did you find out what she was really planning?" I asked. He stared into his coffee. "About 2 months before Thomas died, I overheard her on the phone with someone talking about fabricating DNA results. When I confronted her, she said it was just insurance that you had always resented her and would try to take everything if given the chance. His honesty was unexpected. And you believed her. She is my mother, he said simply. I have spent my whole life believing her version of reality. It is hard to suddenly see that everything might be a lie. I understood that better than he knew. What will you do now? I asked. I am going back to school actually, he replied with a hint of pride. Using the money Thomas left me. Engineering, if you can believe it. I always liked how he explained his work, even though I pretended not to care. That conversation was the first of many. Jake and I would never be close, but we found a kind of peace in acknowledging the ways we had both been used in Victoria's schemes. He eventually gave testimony that helped the prosecutor's case against his mother, a brave step toward independence that could not have been easy. Victoria's legal troubles mounted quickly. The investigation revealed even more extensive fraud than Dad had documented, including identity theft and tax evasion. She eventually accepted a plea deal that included significant restitution, community service, and probation. Her carefully constructed social image was destroyed, her real estate license revoked, and her life of luxury abruptly ended. I never spoke to her again after the funeral, though she made several attempts to contact me through third parties, alternating between threats and bizarre offers of reconciliation. The restraining order Dad had arranged made it easier to maintain that distance. As the legal dust settled, I gradually found my way back to my photography career. The first assignment I accepted after Dad's death was documenting wildlife in the same national park where he had first encouraged my passion for photography. Surrounded by the natural beauty we had explored together, I felt his presence more strongly than I had since his death. With Aunt Martha's encouragement, I established the Thomas Sullivan Scholarship for engineering students using a portion of the estate to help promising young people who, like Dad, came from modest backgrounds, but had big dreams. The first time I presented these scholarships, standing in front of bright, eager students, I felt a sense of purpose beginning to return. The family home eventually became too full of memories to live in comfortably. After much consideration, I decided to sell it and purchase a smaller place closer to my work with a large studio space for my photography. Before leaving, I carefully preserved the garden Dad had loved taking cuttings from his favorite plants to start a new garden at my new home. 1 year after Dad's death, I finally opened the private letter Mr. Harrison had given me at the funeral. I had carried it with me all that time, somehow not ready to read his final words until I had worked through the worst of my grief. My dearest Eddie, he had written in his familiar handwriting. If you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and you have learned truths about Victoria in a painful way. I want you to know that my greatest regret is not standing up to her manipulation sooner. My fear of conflict and my declining health made me choose a path of secret resistance rather than open confrontation. And I worry that choice may have hurt you. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading his explanation, his apology, and finally his hopes for my future. You have always been the best of me, Eddie. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you have become. As am I, live boldly, love openly, and never doubt your worth. You are and always will be my daughter in every way that matters, bound by both blood and love. That letter became my talisman, a reminder of what real love looks like. Not the controlling, possessive attachment Victoria had shown, but the supportive, nurturing bond Dad had created and fought to protect. Time does not heal all wounds completely, but it does help us learn to carry them with more grace. 2 years after that dramatic funeral, I found myself in a much different place. My photography career was thriving with a book of wildlife images published and a teaching position at a local arts college. I had made new friends and reconnected with old ones Victoria had pushed away. Most importantly, I had learned to trust again, cautiously opening my heart to new relationships while maintaining healthy boundaries. The painful lessons of Victoria's deception made me more aware of manipulation tactics, but did not harden me against genuine connection. In quiet moments, I still speak to Dad, sharing my day or asking what he would think of my latest project. I like to believe he can hear me, that he knows his final act of protection worked, and that I am building a life that would make him proud. If there is one thing I have learned from this painful journey, it is that family is defined by love, not just blood or legal documents. Victoria, for all her legal claims as Dad's wife, was never truly family. And Dad, even in death, proved that real family protects each other, tells hard truths, and leaves a legacy of love that outlasts even the most carefully constructed deceptions. What about you? Have you ever had to confront a toxic person who tried to come between you and someone you love? How did you handle it? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, Please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up to manipulation is possible even in the darkest times. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most important family bonds are the ones we fight to protect. Music.